Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. She was just the maid. At least, that's what they called her. She cleaned their floors, raised their children, and swallowed every insult like it was part of her job description. They laughed behind her back, sometimes right to her face, but she never spoke back, never complained. She was silent, strong, sacrificing, and no one ever asked why. But behind that silence was a son, a boy burning with anger, shame, and questions he couldn't ask. He hated their poverty, hated her uniform, until one day, everything changed. This is not just a story about pain. It's about love without words, sacrifice without applause, and a twist that no one, not even she, saw coming. Stay with me, because the woman they treated like trash, her son would grow up to change everything. They called her the maid, as though that word explained everything she was. Not Miss, not Auntie, not even by her name, just the maid. She arrived before sunrise, always the first to enter the quiet mansion. The guards barely nodded at her anymore. They knew her routine better than their own. The faded yellow uniform, the cracked sandals, the small nylon bag that held 1 bottle of water and 2 pieces of dry bread. And yet, she never came late, never spoke unless spoken to, never asked for more than what they gave. She moved like a shadow, silent, unnoticed, but always there, inside the grand house. Her job began without a good morning. Sweep the floor, mop the tiles, scrub the toilets, wash the plates from last night's dinner. Plates she never touched, food she never tasted. She cleaned while they slept, cooked while they scrolled, watched over their children while hers sat alone at home. They talked over her, around her, never to her. She heard them laugh about her once. Why does she always look so serious? Because she's miserable. Imagine scrubbing someone else's floor your whole life. I hope she doesn't try to cook again. Her food smells like poverty. She didn't flinch, not even a blink. She just kept stirring the soup. There were worse things to hear, worse things to remember, like the voice of her landlord last week shouting, "Madam, pay your rent or leave." Being a maid is not an excuse. Or the sound of her son slamming the door. After another fight, yelling, "I hate this life. I hate how they treat you like a dog." And you still go back there. But she still woke up the next day, still took the bus, still walked the final mile when she couldn't afford the fare, still showed up early every single day, not for them, for him, for her boy. She used to have dreams once. She once wanted to become a teacher. She loved books, words, but life had a way of silencing dreams when survival was louder. Her husband had vanished when their child was just 2. 1 minute he was talking about travel. The next he was gone. No money, no note, no phone call. So, she stopped dreaming. She started working. First as a cleaner in a primary school, then as a nanny, then as a housemaid, the kind of job where dignity wasn't in the description. But she did it anyway, because her son needed to eat, because the landlord didn't care about dreams, Because public schools still came with hidden bills. Because life didn't pause for broken hearts. Every night when she returned home, her feet ached, her back screamed, her hands, rough and blistered, shook slightly as she removed her shoes. But she always brought something home. Sometimes food, sometimes coins, always hope, even if it was wrapped in silence. And every night, her son sat in the corner of their one-room apartment, earphones in, hood over his head, eyes cold. She'd ask, "Have you eaten?" He'd shrug, "There's rice on the stove." That was their ritual. No hugs, no stories, just silence and sacrifice, both too tired to explain the pain. There were moments she wanted to scream, step, moments she wanted to quit, especially on days when her employers threw their clothes at her feet like she was invisible, or when they insulted her son without even knowing his name. One day, the madam said to her friend on a call, "These housemaids, they breed children like rats and expect us to feel sorry for them." She was standing just behind the curtain, folding laundry. Her heart stopped, then kept going. She didn't cry, she didn't reply. She just folded the clothes perfectly, like it didn't matter, but it did. It always did. Sometimes, late at night, when her son was asleep, she would sit on the floor and whisper to God, "Just let me finish raising him. Let him not become bitter, like the world. Step, let him see my silence as strength, not weakness. Let him become what I could never be." She didn't pray for wealth or for revenge. She just prayed for time. Time to hold on. Time to keep going. Time to turn her pain into purpose. But time, like everything else, was not promised. And deep down, she knew the weight she carried couldn't last forever. The boy was 15 now, too old to be patient, too young to understand. Every day he watched his mother leave before the sun and return long after it had gone. Every day he watched her eat last, or not at all. Step. Every day he saw the carotises on her hands, the cracks on her heels, the way her eyes always looked tired, even when she smiled. But still, he resented her. He didn't want to, but he did. Because while other boys bragged about their fathers, he had none. Step. While others wore clean uniforms to school, his were faded and patched. While his classmates got dropped off in shiny cars, he walked 2 miles with a backpack that smelled of kerosene and old bread. He hated the way they looked at him, the pity in their eyes, the mockery in their whispers. That's the maid's son. Doesn't even know his father. Probably lives in one of those slums with rats and no electricity. Tep. They weren't wrong, but it still hurt. He started skipping school, started mixing with boys who knew how to make money fast. They weren't smart, but they had loud phones, loud mouths, and louder confidence. They told him, "Your mother's wasting her life. You don't need to suffer too. Come with us. One job, quick cash." At first, he refused, but anger is like fire. It doesn't die when ignored. It grows, and he was burning. Step. One night, the storm came, not outside, inside. His mother had returned late again. Her dress was soaked from rain, her hands trembling. He had just gotten home himself, smelling of cigarettes and lies. She asked where he'd been. He rolled his eyes. She asked again. He snapped. "Why do you care? You're never here. You clean their houses while I rot in this one." She froze, not because of what he said, but because maybe he was right. He continued, "You let them treat you like a slave. You bow, you beg, you have no pride, and you want me to respect that." Tap. The words sliced her deeper than any wound she'd ever known. Tap. But she didn't raise her voice. She just sat down, wet clothes clinging to her skin, eyes heavy, not with tears, but with something worse. Disappointment, not in him, in herself. She whispered, "I know you don't understand, but everything I do for you." He shook his head. "No, you do it because you're afraid. Afraid to ask for more. Afraid to fight back. Afraid to leave that job." And then he walked out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the rusted hinges. She didn't sleep that night. She just sat and stared at the ceiling. Was she really afraid? Maybe she was afraid that if she stopped working, the lights would go off, the roof would leak, the rent would pile up, and he would suffer more. Maybe she was afraid to hope, because hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she had never been afraid of hard work, never afraid of hunger. She was only afraid of one thing, failing him. The next day, she went to work as usual. Same faded dress, same routine, same silence, but her heart was heavier. They mocked her again. This time about her son. "You know these poor children always turn out bad. No father, no guidance, no class." She wanted to scream, but she didn't, because screaming wouldn't feed him, wouldn't shelter him, wouldn't change anything. So she swallowed her pain again, and kept cleaning.
Chap.
That evening, she returned home to an empty room. He was gone. No note, no message, just silence. Her chest tightened. She ran to the neighbors. No one had seen him. She called his friend's phone, switched off. She checked the streets, the corners, the park bench she liked to sit on. Nothing. By midnight, she was crying. Not softly, but the kind of crying that sounded like prayer and panic at the same time. She wasn't crying because he left. She was crying because she feared what he might become without her. At dawn, there was a knock. She rushed to the door, but it wasn't him. It was two policemen. Her knees buckled. They said he'd been caught with a gang of boys who broke into a shop the night before. No one was hurt, but property was destroyed. He was in a holding cell. She didn't have money for bail. They asked her to come with them. She followed, heartbreaking with every step. She saw him behind the bars. His face was bruised, his eyes filled with shame. She didn't shout, didn't scold, didn't ask why. She just stood there and cried. He turned his face away, but she walked closer. She whispered through the bars, "I didn't raise you with much, but I raised you with love, even if you couldn't see it." He didn't speak. She continued, "You said I have no pride, but you were my pride. Still are, even now." His lips trembled. She reached out, fingers barely touching the cold metal. "If you want to leave this place, leave this life, I'll be here. I always was." He finally looked at her, eyes red, voice shaking. "I'm sorry." She nodded slowly. "Then come home. We'll figure the rest out, together." They walked home from the station in silence. No words, just the sound of sandals scraping gravel, and rain softly beginning again. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, but she gave it anyway. She didn't deserve this pain, but she carried it anyway. When they got home, the bulb in the ceiling flickered, then died. Another unpaid bill, another reminder of how close they were to losing everything. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed her scarf. He stood in the doorway, unsure. She looked up and said one thing, "You still have time to change your story." He nodded slowly, and for the first time, in a long time, he believed her. The next morning, he woke up before her, swept the small room, warmed leftover rice, washed the pile of dishes in the corner. She awoke to silence, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. He sat across from her with a plate in his hands. "Eat, that's all," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, a tired smile, but a real one.
Over the next few days, he kept to himself, didn't go out, didn't call friends, didn't talk much. He searched online with a second-hand phone his mother had fixed months ago. It lagged and glitched, but it worked. He watched videos, tutorials, free courses.
He didn't even know what he was looking for. Until one day, he found it. A short video. A man standing in front of a laptop saying one sentence. "You can learn a skill that will feed your mother forever." That sentence hit something deep. He didn't scroll past. He clicked. And that click changed everything. He began learning digital design, graphics, logos, thumbnails, using cracked software and free apps, on a phone that overheated every hour. At first his designs were bad, really bad, but he kept going. He'd sneak to a local cafe with free Wi-Fi, stay until the owner chased him out, then return the next day. He sold his old Bluetooth speaker for data money, borrowed a laptop from a boy in church for 2 days, watched 10 hours of YouTube videos in one. No one knew what he was doing, not even her. She just noticed something had changed. His eyes had a spark again. He was busy, focused, and present. One night he came home excited. Mama, he never called her that anymore. She turned, startled. He was smiling, breathless. Someone just paid me $20 for a logo. I did it on my phone. Look, he shoved the cracked screen toward her. She looked at the design. She didn't understand the details, but she understood what it meant. Hope. She cupped his face in her palms and kissed his forehead. "I'm proud of you." He closed his eyes. Those 4 words meant more than $20 ever could. Weeks passed, then months. He got better. Clients came through Instagram, referrals, word of mouth. He bought a second-hand laptop, fixed it himself with online guides. Soon he was making more in a week than his mother made in a month. He offered her the money. She refused, smiling. "Put it into your future. I'll be fine." He didn't argue, but he made a secret promise. "One day you will never lift a broom again." Then came the turning point. One evening, while scrolling through social media, he saw something. A job posting. A global creative agency was hosting a competition. Create a design for a major brand. Winner gets a scholarship, mentorship, and a contract. He paused. His heart pounded. He knew this was his shot, but the deadline was in 72 hours. He shut himself in their small room, worked non-stop. No sleep, no breaks, just one goal. He submitted with 2 minutes to spare, then waited and prayed. 2 weeks later, an email came. He screamed. His mother rushed in, thinking he was hurt. He was crying, but not from pain. "I won," he whispered. She stood frozen. "Mama, I won. They're flying me out. I got it. Everything, it's changing." She sat down, covering her mouth. Tears fell down her face, not because of the opportunity, but because for the first time, her suffering had bloomed into something beautiful. The day he left, she packed his bag twice, pressed his clothes, snuck in a small Bible and a folded photo of them. At the airport, he hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. He whispered, "I'll come back for you. I promise." She smiled through tears. "I'll be here. I always was." The airplane rumbled in the sky like a whisper from the future. He stared out the window, eyes wide open, not because of the view, but because he couldn't believe it was real. A passport, a seat by the window, a name badge with his photo, and a destination that wasn't just a dream anymore. For the first time, he wasn't running away from anything. He was flying towards something. The moment he stepped into the cold air of a new city, it hit him. This world was louder, brighter, faster. Everything smelled like electricity and ambition, but deep inside him, there was still silence. The silence of a boy raised in shadows, a boy who had seen too much pain and learned to smile through broken teeth. He walked into the agency headquarters, heart thumping like a drum. Everyone looked confident, polished, sharp, rich. He wore the only suit he had. His mother had ironed it twice, sewn the sleeves, prayed over the collar. He stood out, but he stood tall, because he wasn't just representing himself. He was carrying her with him. Every insult she swallowed, every flaw she scrubbed, every night she cried quietly in the dark. He carried all of it, and that gave him strength. The competition was fierce. Designers from around the world, Ivy League degrees, fluent in 5 languages, connected to people he'd only seen on screens. He had none of that, just grit, heart, and hunger. He worked twice as hard, slept half as much, learned their software, their systems, their strategies. They mocked his accent, his clothes, his silence. But none of that mattered, because every night when he lay on his bed in the dorm room, he saw her face in his dreams, and he remembered why he came. One day, during a strategy meeting, the mentor asked a question: what's the soul of a brand? Everyone gave textbook answers: emotion, authenticity, storytelling. He said nothing, until the mentor turned to him. You, what do you think? He cleared his throat, then spoke. The soul of a brand is pain, turned into purpose. Silence. Everyone stared. Then the mentor smiled. Say that again. He did, and that moment changed how they saw him. Not as a charity case, not as an outsider, but as someone who had something real to offer. Over time, his work started to shine. He wasn't just following trends, he was creating them. He understood color, like he understood hunger. He knew how to speak to broken people, because he had been one. They began to notice. They started asking him questions, copying his layout, requesting his help. The boy who once felt invisible was now impossible to ignore. But just when everything seemed to be aligning, a message came. An email from a lawyer. He stared at it for 10 minutes before clicking. The subject line: "You urgent, concerning your father." His hands shook. He hadn't heard that word in years. He opened it. A long message. Legal jargon, a hospital name, and 3 words that made his stomach drop. Critical, unconscious, alone. His father had suffered a stroke. No one knew what triggered it. But he was now hospitalized in a public ward back home. And the hospital was looking for next of kin. He sat for hours, staring at the screen. He thought he had buried this chapter. The man who abandoned them, who left his mother in the dirt, who beat her dreams out of her body. Why should he care? Why now? He closed the laptop, paced the room, then remembered something. A night long ago, when he was still small enough to be carried, he had cried out from a nightmare, and a man, his father, had lifted him, held him close, whispered in his ear, "You're my boy. I'll protect you forever." That memory didn't match the monster he'd grown up hating, but it existed, and that made everything complicated. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning he called his mother. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. He asked if she knew. She said yes. She'd visited him once, then didn't return. Why? He asked. Her voice cracked. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean you go back. Sometimes it just means you let go. He was silent, then asked the question he never thought he would. Should I come home? She replied without hesitation, "That's your decision to make. But whatever you choose, I'll be proud." He hung up and stared at the wall. In front of him, opportunity, success, the life he always wanted. Behind him, a broken past, a sick father, and unresolved pain. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then booked a flight home. The airport felt smaller than he remembered. The air thicker, the streets slower, the faces older. It had been 5 years since he left, but everything still smelled the same. Dust, smoke, home. A taxi took him from the terminal, through the potholed roads, past the old markets, past the gate where he once sat, barefoot, sketching on torn paper. He didn't look out the window much. He just kept thinking. He wasn't sure. Maybe it was guilt, maybe duty, or maybe it was the ache of unfinished business. The hospital was loud and grey. People waited everywhere, some crying, some sleeping, some already too used to pain. He gave the name at the counter. The nurse looked at him twice, then pointed. Ward 7, last bed by the window. He walked slowly, each step heavier than the last, and then he saw him. The man who had haunted his dreams, the man whose back he'd watched walk away, the man who made his mother a widow, while still alive. Now he lay small, breathing through a tube, unshaven, pale, powerless. There was no anger in that bed, only silence. He stood by the door, staring, waiting for something to rise up inside him. But it didn't. No hate, no rage, just a strange emptiness. He pulled a chair, sat. For a long time, he said nothing. Then softly, almost like a whisper, "You don't even know I'm here, do you?" No response. "You ruined everything. You walked away. You made her clean floors while you disappeared into some new woman's life. Still nothing." He exhaled. "And yet here I am, sitting beside you." The monitors beat. The man's chest rose and fell. Days passed. He came every day, sat in silence, sometimes read to him, sometimes just watched. The doctors said he might wake up, or not, but he kept coming. Why? Because the boy who once cried in the dark was now a man who could face the silence. One afternoon, the doctor handed him an envelope. He had a locker. This was inside. He opened it. Photos, old ones, of him as a baby. His mother smiling in the sun. A handwritten note. It was a letter from his father, dated 2 years ago. "To my son, if you ever find this, it means I never had the courage to say it to your face. I made mistakes. Big ones. I was scared, weak, proud. I didn't know how to be a man, so I pretended to be one. But I watched from afar, your scholarships, your art, your interviews. I kept every article. I bragged about you to strangers. But I never called, because I thought you hated me. Maybe you still do. But if there's one thing I can leave behind, it's this. I was wrong about love, about life, about your mother. She was gold, and I threw her away. Forgive me if you can, and if you can't, just know I never stopped being proud of you, Dad." He held the letter in shaking hands, and for the first time in years, he cried, not for what was, but for what could never be. That night, he visited his mother. She opened the door and gasped. He looked taller, older, and more broken. They hugged. No words, just warmth. He handed her the letter. She read it, slowly, quietly, then said, "He always wanted to come back, but pride is a heavy chain." He nodded. "He may never wake up." She looked at him, eyes soft, voice firm. "Then let him hear forgiveness, even if only in sleep." The next day, he sat beside the bed again, pulled the letter from his pocket, and began to read it aloud. Every word, every line. His voice cracked halfway through. Tears rolled silently. When he finished, he looked at the man in the bed, then whispered, "I forgive you." The machines beeped, and for a moment he thought he saw a twitch. Just a flicker, a tear sliding from the corner of the old man's eye. Or maybe it was his imagination, but it didn't matter, because the boy who once hated his name had now given it a second chance. In the days that followed, something shifted. He began teaching design at a local center, offering free workshops for youth in the slums, kids like he used to be, with big dreams and small pockets. He didn't tell them about his past. He didn't need to. They could feel it in how he spoke, in how he listened, in how he stayed back after class to help the slowest ones catch up. He was building something, not just a career, but a legacy. And then one morning, his mother got a call from the hospital. She answered, half dreading it. But the voice on the other end said, "He's awake." The hospital felt different that morning, brighter, less heavy. He walked faster than usual, heart racing, palms cold. "He's awake." Those words had stayed with him all night. He wasn't sure what he wanted. Closure, answers, or just one last chance to ask why. He stepped into the ward, and there he was, sitting up, barely, eyes open, weaker, older, but awake. They stared at each other. No machines between them now, just silence and history. The old man tried to speak. His throat cracked, dry, brittle. He gestured to the water. His son poured, held it to his lips. It felt strange, helping the same hand that once slapped a table and screamed, fragile, human. After a long pause, the old man spoke. "You came." The son nodded, didn't smile, didn't cry, just looked, then replied. "I read the letter." A silence. Then the father looked down, ashamed. "I wanted to be better, but you weren't." The father nodded. "No, I wasn't." There was no anger in his voice, no excuses, just raw truth. "I left because I was weak. Your mother deserved gold. I gave her dust." The son exhaled, softly. "You broke her." "I know." Another silence. "Do you love her?" "More than I ever knew, but I loved myself more, and that's what destroyed us." The words were hard, but honest, and somehow that hurt more than lies. The son sat, eyes sharp, voice steady. "She scrubbed other people's floors while you built another life. You left me to grow up with rage in my chest." "I know," the father said, eyes filled with regret. "And I paid for it every single day." "Then why didn't you come back?" The old man swallowed. "Because I thought you were better off hating me than being disappointed again." That broke something inside them both. A long pause followed. Then the son said something neither of them expected. "I hated you for years, but now I just feel tired." Tired of what? Of carrying anger. "It's heavy." The father looked at him, eyes moist. "You don't owe me forgiveness. I didn't come for you." The father looked confused. The son continued, "I came for her. She deserved to see me return with dignity." "And what about me?" He thought for a moment, then replied, "You? I came to say goodbye." But just as he stood to leave, the old man grabbed his wrist, weakly, but firmly. "Don't go yet." "Why?" "Because there's something I never told you." The son hesitated, then sat again. The father turned slightly and whispered, "I never abandoned you completely." He pulled out a crumpled paper from the drawer beside him. Shaking hands, barely able to grip, he handed it over. "That's the land your mother used to talk about. The one in her village. I bought it years ago. In her name, but never told her. I was waiting for the right time. The son stared at it. A land deed. Legit. In her name. Why now? Because it's all I have left. Give it to her. Maybe she can finally build that house she dreamed of. His throat tightened. He wanted to scream, to cry, to hug the old man. But he did none of those. He just said, "She doesn't need your land. She needed your loyalty. But I'll give it to her. Not because of you, but because she still believes in mercy." That night, he sat with his mother, handed her the paper. She read it, smiled weakly. "He kept this all these years. He said he bought it for you." She was quiet, then whispered, "He always promised we'd build a house with wide windows, so I could see the sunrise while cooking." The son asked, "Do you forgive him?" She paused. "I forgave him years ago. Forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for peace. Mine." The next day, she visited the hospital. He watched from the hallway. She sat by the bed, held the man's hand, whispered something no one else heard, then left. As they drove home, she said something that stayed with him. "Pain breaks people, but love rebuilds." And from that day, something shifted in him too. Not overnight, but slowly. The resentment started to melt. He kept visiting the hospital, not every day, but enough. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat. And over time, they found something that looked like peace. Not perfect, not clean, but enough. And months later, when the father passed quietly in his sleep, there were no screams, no drama, just quiet tears. A simple funeral, a small frame placed on a shelf beside the TV. The son gave the eulogy, and for the first time, he called him my father. At the end of the speech, he said, "He was a broken man who made broken choices, but he taught me this: no one is too far gone to make one last good decision." The hall went silent, and in that silence, forgiveness was complete. Months passed. The land was cleared. The foundation was laid. The mother now smiled more. She had waited her whole life to build something that was hers, not for the families she cleaned for, not borrowed, not rented, but her own. A small house with wide windows, so she could see the sunrise while making breakfast, just like she dreamed. The son oversaw the construction himself. Every brick felt like a reward for every silent tear they had both cried. He no longer spoke of his father, but he no longer carried that anger either. It was as if peace had finally settled over them, like a soft morning fog. And for once, life was quiet. Too quiet. One Sunday afternoon, a car pulled up in front of the construction site. It was sleek, polished, new. Out stepped a man, well-dressed, smiling. Too much. He wore a gold watch, designer shoes, the kind of confidence that made you uneasy. The son narrowed his eyes. The man extended a hand. "Good afternoon, sir. My name is Edwin. I'm your late father's lawyer." At first, there was confusion. "Lawyer? I thought everything was already settled." Edwin smiled. "There's more. Your father had another will, a more recent one." The son froze. "What are you talking about?" Edwin opened a brown folder, neatly folded documents inside. The land deed was part of the old will, but the new one, it changes everything. He read it aloud. Clause 4B. "In the event of my death, the property situated at plot 26B, Obelendi village, shall be transferred to my next of kin, as defined under Nigerian property law." The son interrupted. "My mother's name is on that land." Edwin nodded. "I know, but your father never registered it officially. It's still under his name in the government's record. But he told me, he said he bought it for her. Edwin sighed. Intent doesn't always count in court, unfortunately. There was silence. The mother arrived moments later, holding a bag of food for the construction workers. She smiled at Edwin. Good afternoon, sir. The son turned to her. Mummy, we need to talk. That evening, they sat down. The son explained everything. The revised will, the lawyer, the loophole. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wall as he spoke. She didn't interrupt, didn't cry. When he was done, she simply said, God doesn't sleep. The next few days were a storm. Edwin reappeared, with paperwork and bad news. The land could be contested. He claimed there was another legal heir, someone no one expected. Her an unfamiliar name, Ogechi. The son's voice trembled as he read the document. Who is Ogechi? Edwin replied, your father's daughter, from another woman. She's 22, and she's filing a claim. The mother dropped the cup she was holding. It shattered, and with it, her strength. Ogechi, a girl neither of them had met, now fighting to take away the only thing his mother had ever owned. The only thing that had made all the years of suffering feel worthwhile. The betrayal cut deeper than anything the father had ever done in life. He had left them with secrets, and those secrets now returned with claws. They tried to fight, hired a lawyer, submitted every receipt, every record of construction, but it was no use. Legally, the land was still in the father's name, and the court sided with the registered heir. The court gave her ownership, and she arrived the next week. With bulldozers, the son stood in front of them, fists clenched. His mother knelt by the gate, begging, not for herself, but for the workers. Please, just let them take the tools, the cement. Don't waste it. But Ogechi didn't even look at her. She wore glasses, a sharp suit, and a heart that seemed frozen. It's nothing personal. It's the law. She walked away. Just like that. The house that was half built was flattened in 20 minutes. The mother didn't speak the entire ride home. And when they got back, she went straight to her room, closed the door, and prayed, softly, over and over. That night, the son sat on the floor outside her room, head in his hands. He whispered, I should have protected you better. No reply, just the sound of old tears soaking into a cheap mattress. 3 days passed, then 5, then a week, and slowly she emerged, smiling, as if nothing had happened. She returned to her cleaning job, took the bus, swept floors, packed leftovers from rich homes for dinner. The son couldn't understand. How could she be okay? How could she still sing softly while cooking? One morning, he asked her, why aren't you angry? She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. Because bitterness is another form of bondage, and I've been in chains too long. He broke down, cried into her lap like a boy again, and she stroked his head, just like she used to when he was 5. Back when they had nothing but love and boiled rice. But inside him, a fire was building. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not while his mother still worked as a maid at 57. Not while someone else enjoyed the land she prayed for every night for 30 years. One night, as he stared at the ceiling, an idea came. He sat up, eyes wide, breath shallow. He whispered to himself, if the law favors the powerful, then I'll become powerful. I'll change the game. The son's mind raced. How do you fight a system built to crush the weak? How do you climb when every rung is slippery? He knew he couldn't rely on pity or old favors. This was a new game, and he was going to play it. First, he took a job. Not just any job. He began working nights at a busy internet cafe downtown, fixing computers, helping customers. Sometimes when he was tired, he sat alone in the corner, watching the steady flow of people, the businessmen, the students, the hustlers. He began to learn about investments, about property laws, about companies, about money. He saved every naira he earned. Then he made his move, with borrowed confidence and shaky hands. He walked into a local bank. "I want to open a business account," he said. The banker raised an eyebrow. "You're young." "I'm serious," the son replied. Weeks turned into months. He studied hard, read books on finance, watched videos, asked questions. He began small, buying and selling phones, then computers, then land titles. Slowly the son transformed, from a boy who knew nothing about business to a young man who could speak the language of power. But still, every night, he went home and saw his mother still working, still exhausted, still waiting for justice. One evening, the son came home with a new plan. "Mummy, I found a way to fight for us," he said. She smiled, tired but proud. "I've never doubted you," he explained. "There's a loophole in the land registry. If we can buy adjacent plots and prove we've owned them longer, we can petition the government to merge the land." Her eyes widened. "And that means what?" "We get the land back," he whispered. But to do that, they needed money. More than the son had, more than the mother could save. The son looked around the house, saw the worn-out furniture, the single phone that barely worked, his mother's tired hands. He decided he would sacrifice. The next day, he sold the one thing he loved most, his old motorcycle. He told his mother, "It's not forever, it's for us." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, because she understood. With the money, he bought 2 small plots next to the disputed land. Then came the long wait. Petitions, meetings, bribes, threats. People told him to give up, said he was too small, too poor. But he didn't listen. Every setback became fuel, every insult a reminder. One night, he sat with his mother, under the dim light of their tiny room. She took his hand. "Pride is a heavy burden," she said softly. "Sometimes, love means knowing when to hold on and when to let go." The son looked into her eyes and knew she was right. But he was not ready to let go. The fight was far from over. The days grew darker, not from the weather but from a shadow creeping closer. The son thought he had seen the worst, but the world had other plans. One evening, as he sat reviewing documents, his phone buzzed, an anonymous message. "Stop digging or you'll lose everything." No signature, no sender, just a warning. He felt the weight in his chest. Fear, but also anger. Who would threaten them? The next morning, the construction workers found the small plots vandalized, fences torn down, tools destroyed, signs ripped apart. The son's heart sank. Someone was fighting back. Someone powerful. He went to the lawyer. "This isn't just about land anymore," he said quietly. "It's intimidation." The lawyer nodded gravely. "You need to be careful." But the mother, she remained steady, calm. She looked at her son and said, "Sometimes those who hurt us the most are the ones we least expect." Confused, the son pressed. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Your father, he had enemies, people he crossed, people who still want to see us fail." That night, the son sat alone. He thought of the years they had endured, the years she had sacrificed, and the years of silence. Suddenly, a knock at the door. He opened it slowly. A figure stood there, not a stranger, someone from their past. It was a neighbor with a face filled with regret. "I'm sorry," the neighbor said. "I kept silent for too long." The son listened as the neighbor revealed secrets, whispers of betrayal, the father's hidden debts, old grudges, and a warning from the man who had taken over the land. "He's not just a businessman," the neighbor said. "He's a man who will stop at nothing." The son's resolve hardened. He was no longer fighting just for land. He was fighting for justice, for his mother's dignity, for their future. The next morning, they met at dawn, mother and son, two warriors, two souls bound by sacrifice. She took his hands and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember this. Love and forgiveness are our greatest weapons, not anger." And with that, they prepared for the battle ahead. A battle that would test everything they believed in. The days that followed the threatening letter felt heavier than any they had endured before. The mother and son moved cautiously, shadows of doubt flickering in their eyes. What had once been a fight to reclaim their land had become a war to protect their very existence. The son couldn't shake the feeling that with every step forward, they were sinking deeper into a trap, one designed to break their spirit, crush their resolve. The mother noticed the change in him. Late at night, she would watch as he sat alone by the window, the weight of worry pressing down on his young shoulders. One evening, she finally spoke. "You carry too much," she said softly. He looked up, startled by the vulnerability in her voice. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I don't want to lose us." Her hand found his, warm and steady. "Fear is not weakness," she said. "It is a sign that what we protect matters." She squeezed his hand and continued. "But remember, we don't carry this alone." Those words planted a seed, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could take root. Together they decided to be more than just fighters in this battle. They would become a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. The son reached out to the community, neighbors who had long watched their struggle, but remained silent out of fear or apathy. He shared their story openly, not just as a plea for help, but as a rallying cry. "We stand for more than land," he said at a local gathering. "We stand for justice, for dignity, for every voice that has been ignored." The response was surprising. One by one, others came forward. Stories surfaced of unfair evictions, broken promises, families torn apart by greed and corruption. The mother's story was no longer theirs alone. It had become the story of a community longing to be heard. With this newfound support, the son and his allies began to organize. They documented abuses, collected testimonies, and worked with the lawyer to file official complaints. Every meeting, every phone call, every signature felt like a step toward reclaiming not just land, but their dignity. But the fight was far from over. The man behind the threats was not idle. His influence reached into local government offices, law enforcement, and media. Attempts were made to discredit the son and his mother. Rumors spread that they were troublemakers, opportunists, even criminals. One afternoon, the son was stopped on the street by a police officer he had known since childhood. "You need to be careful," the officer warned quietly. "People are watching. They don't like what you're stirring up." It was a chilling reminder of the stakes. The son realized the battle was not just in courtrooms and offices. It was in the hearts and minds of people who could be swayed by power and fear. Despite the pressure, the mother and son refused to back down. They held fast to the truth, their anchor in the storm. Late at night, as the city slept, they would talk about the future they dreamed of. A future where respect was earned, where sacrifices were honored, and where their story would be one of triumph, not defeat. But sacrifice was already shaping their present. The mother's health began to falter. Years of hard labor, stress, and sleepless nights took their toll. She grew weaker, but never stopped working. The son watched helplessly as she pushed through pain, masking it with a smile meant to keep his hope alive. One morning, as she prepared breakfast, she suddenly faltered. The sun caught her before she could fall. Her face was pale, lips trembling. Fear surged through him, not for the battle, but for the woman who had given everything. At the hospital, doctors delivered the news: exhaustion, anemia, and the early signs of a heart condition worsened by years of neglect. The son sat by her bedside, holding her hand, feeling the weight of guilt and helplessness. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you better." She shook her head weakly. "You have protected me," she said, "by fighting, by refusing to let us be invisible." In that hospital room, surrounded by sterile white walls and the steady beat of machines, they made a promise to continue the fight, to keep pushing until the truth was heard and justice served, but also to remember that their bond, forged through pain, sacrifice, and love, was their greatest strength. Days later, armed with renewed resolve and community support, the son prepared to face the next stage of the battle, a public hearing that could decide their fate. He knew the stakes. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about proving that even the most broken could rise. That family, forgiveness, and sacrifice were not just words. They were the foundation of hope. As he stood before the council, speaking with quiet strength, the son felt the eyes of the community, the weight of his mother's sacrifices, and the promise of a better future resting on his shoulders. Every word was a testament to their journey, from a maid treated like trash to a family demanding respect. And as he finished, a hush fell over the room. It was the moment before change, the moment where hope and fear hung in the balance. The day of the public hearing arrived, heavy with anticipation and a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. The air was thick with whispered conversations, hurried glances, and the restless tapping of shoes on cold tile floors. The son sat beside his mother, her hand clasped tightly in his, both bracing themselves for what felt like the moment that could change everything or nothing at all. The officials entered, faces unreadable, eyes fixed on the papers and reports that had been shuffled between their hands for weeks. The room was a stage, and every word spoken would echo beyond the walls, into the community, into lives already worn thin by struggle and neglect. When it was the son's turn to speak, a hush fell over the room. He rose slowly, steadying himself with a deep breath. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, some skeptical, others indifferent, and a few quietly hopeful. This was more than a legal battle. It was a test of their courage, their endurance, their humanity. His voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. He told their story, not just facts and figures, but the pain, the sacrifice, the relentless hope. He spoke of the mother's years of labor, of the way she had been dismissed, treated as invisible, despite the life she poured into their home and their community. He spoke of the threats, the fear that had become their constant companion, and of the dreams they still held in the face of it all. As he spoke, a figure in the back of the room shifted, a respected elder in the community, known for his quiet wisdom and steady influence. When the son finished, this elder stood and walked forward, his presence commanding attention. He did not mince words. He spoke of justice, of fairness, and the importance of honoring those who have been overlooked and disrespected. He shared his own story, one of hardship and resilience, drawing a line between his past and the family before them. His voice carried the weight of experience and the power to sway. Suddenly, the room's atmosphere shifted. What had been a skeptical tribunal began to soften. The son saw nods where there had been frowns. He felt the tide turning, slowly but unmistakably. But the victory was not without cost. That evening, as they returned home, the mother's steps grew slower, her breathing labored. The son helped her inside, worry gnawing at him. The fight had demanded everything from them, and now her body was beginning to pay the price. At the hospital the next day, the doctors were more concerned. The mother needed rest, medication, and time, things scarce in their world. The son found himself at a crossroads. The hearing had opened a door, but the battle was far from over. And yet, the woman who had been his anchor was now fragile, dependent. One night, sitting by her bedside, he faced the hardest truth. His pride pushed him to keep fighting, to stand tall no matter the cost. But his love whispered otherwise. He reached for her hand. "I don't know if I can do this without you," he confessed. She smiled faintly. "You don't have to. We fight together, always." That moment marked a turning point. The son began to balance the fight for justice with the care his mother needed. He leaned on the community that had begun to rally behind them. He asked for help when he could, letting go of the pride that had once kept him isolated, and slowly things began to change. The council delayed their decision, but the shift in attitude was undeniable. They could no longer ignore the strength of a family that refused to be erased. Gratitude blossomed in the son's heart, not just for the small victories, but for the journey itself, for the lessons learned about sacrifice and forgiveness, about pride and love. As the mother's health stabilized, they shared quiet moments, small celebrations in a life that had been marked by hardship. The son knew the road ahead would still be long and difficult, but for the first time, he believed that change was possible. Together they had transformed pain into power. The waiting was the hardest part. Days stretched into weeks as the family awaited the council's final decision. The son sat by the window of their modest home, eyes tracing the shadows cast by passing clouds, each one mirroring the heaviness inside him. Hope had grown like a fragile seed in their hearts, but uncertainty lingered like a storm on the horizon. The public hearing had stirred something, a shift in the community, a crack in the armor of indifference, but the final verdict still hung in the balance. The mother, her strength gradually returning, remained the steady light in the storm. Yet even her resilience had limits, and the weight of waiting pressed down on her as well. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the son found himself alone with his thoughts. He reflected on the sacrifices made, the years of endless labor, the battles fought silently behind closed doors, the moments of despair disguised by forced smiles. The truth was clear. This fight was bigger than them. It was about dignity, about respect, about claiming a place in a world that had tried to erase them, but the toll had been immense. The son's thoughts drifted to his own journey, how the rebellion of youth had given way to responsibility, how anger had softened into understanding. The woman who had once been seen as nothing more than a housemaid was now the heart of a movement that touched everyone around her. The son stood and paced the small room. He realized something vital. The fight was no longer just about proving their worth to others. It was about embracing their own. News finally arrived. A letter, formal and terse, arrived early one morning. The son's hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside was the council's decision. The words were measured, cautious, a compromise that offered a chance, but no guarantees. They would grant limited support for the family's needs, including access to healthcare and some financial assistance. But the underlying issues that had sparked the battle remained unresolved. It was a bittersweet victory. The son's heart swelled with relief and pride, but also with a profound sadness. Years of struggle had culminated in a step forward, but the journey was far from over. That afternoon, as the mother rested, the son sat beside her. He read the letter aloud, voice steady despite the swirl of emotions. She listened quietly, a faint smile touching her lips. "This is not the end," she said softly. "It's just the beginning." The weeks that followed were marked by cautious rebuilding. The support from the council eased some burdens, but it was the change in the community that was most striking. Neighbors who had once averted their eyes now stopped to offer words of encouragement, small acts of kindness that carried immense meaning. The son found himself invited to community meetings, asked to share his story, and to help others who faced similar struggles. His rebellious past became a wellspring of wisdom, a beacon for those lost in their own battles. But even as the external world shifted, the family faced new challenges at home. The mother's health remained fragile, and the son juggled multiple jobs to keep the household afloat. The exhaustion was relentless, but there was no room for despair. One night, after a long day of work, the son returned home to find his mother waiting with a small bundle of papers. She handed them to him without a word. He unfolded the documents and recognized them instantly. Applications for grants, scholarships, programs that could provide education and opportunities beyond their immediate struggle. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked up. "We can change the story," she whispered. "Not just survive, but thrive." The son threw himself into the work, balancing caregiving with nights spent researching and applying for programs that could open new doors. Slowly, hope began to take root again, deeper and more resilient than before. But the real test was yet to come. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a local organization offering a chance for the son to attend a leadership program designed to empower young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. It was an opportunity unlike any he had ever dreamed of, a path to break free from the cycle of hardship and to build a future on his own terms. But it came with a price. Attending the program meant leaving his mother behind for months. It meant trusting others to care for her and stepping into a world filled with uncertainty. The son wrestled with the decision. Pride and love clashed in his heart. Could he leave the woman who had sacrificed everything for him? Would he be abandoning her in her time of greatest need? Yet deep down he knew that to honor her sacrifice, he had to seize this chance. The night before his departure, they sat together in the quiet room, holding hands and sharing memories of their journey. The mother smiled, eyes full of pride and tears. "Go," she said simply. "Live the life we dreamed of." As he boarded the bus the next morning, the son looked back at the small house one last time. He carried with him not just the weight of the past, but the promise of the future, a future forged from love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond of family. The bus rolled away from the neighborhood, carrying the son toward a world that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The streets he had walked all his life gave way to new landscapes, tall buildings, unfamiliar faces, endless possibilities. He sat quietly, the weight of the journey pressing on him, but beneath it, a spark of hope flickered. At the leadership program, he was surrounded by young people from many different backgrounds, each with their own story of struggle and survival. The son listened, learned, and slowly found his place among them, not as an outsider, but as someone with something valuable to offer. The days were long, filled with classes, workshops, and discussions that challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and the world. He was forced to confront the anger and pain that had once fueled his rebellion. He learned the power of empathy, of forgiveness,
not just for others, but for himself. One evening, during a quiet reflection session, the son wrote a letter to his mother. He poured out his fears, his gratitude, and the dreams they shared. "I carry you with me every day." He wrote, "Your strength is my strength." Back home, the mother held the letter close. Though the house was quieter without him, she felt his presence in every corner, in the soft hum of the evening breeze, in the light that filtered through the window. But life was not without its challenges.
The mother's health took an unexpected turn. A sudden illness landed her in the hospital, and the son's absence was felt like a heavy shadow. He rushed back, torn between the new world he was building and the one he had left behind. The reunion was bittersweet. He sat by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the fragile pulse of a life that had given him everything. "Why did you leave?" she whispered one night, voice weak but filled with pain. "I had to," he replied softly, "to build a better future for us both." Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from anger, but from love and understanding. That moment sealed their bond, no longer just mother and son, but partners in a shared journey toward redemption. Back at the leadership program, the son was determined to finish what he had started. He used the experience to sharpen his skills, to prepare for the fight ahead, not just for himself, but for his mother and their community. He returned home months later, changed but grounded. The family's struggles had not disappeared, but they faced them together, stronger and wiser. The son took on a new role, not just as a caretaker, but as a leader, an advocate, and a symbol of hope. Word spread of their story, inspiring others to stand up, to fight for dignity and respect. The son realized that true strength came from embracing vulnerability, from acknowledging the sacrifices of those who came before him. And through it all, the mother's quiet resilience remained the foundation, a reminder that love and sacrifice are the roots from which greatness grows. The years that followed unfolded like a slow but steady tide, sometimes calm, sometimes relentless, but always moving forward. The son's role in the community grew beyond anything he had imagined. He became a voice for those who had been silenced, a bridge between worlds that rarely met. His story, once one of hardship, anger, and rebellion, had transformed into a narrative of hope, resilience, and profound change. Yet, with this new role came new burdens. The weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders in ways that sometimes threatened to crush him. There were days when exhaustion pulled at his resolve, and nights when doubt crept in like a cold shadow. But through it all, the memory of the mother's sacrifice was a steady flame, guiding him through the darkness. One particular evening, after a long day of meetings and advocacy, the son returned home to find his mother waiting in the doorway, frail but smiling. Her eyes held a depth of pride that words could never capture. They sat together in silence for a long time, the room filled with the quiet hum of their shared history. Then she spoke, voice soft but unwavering. "You have become everything I dreamed you could be," she said. "But remember, true strength is not just in what you do for others, but in how you forgive yourself and those who wronged us." The son nodded, understanding that the battle for dignity was not just external. It was a personal journey toward peace. In the months that followed, the son took her words to heart. He worked not just to change the world around him, but to heal the wounds inside. Forgiveness became a daily practice, not a single act. The community, once divided by prejudice and silence, began to change. Old grudges softened, new alliances formed. The mother's years of enduring disrespect slowly gave way to recognition and respect, not just for her, but for all who had been overlooked and undervalued. The son led efforts to create programs that offered education, healthcare, and legal support for families like theirs. He spoke at gatherings, urging people to see the humanity in everyone. And yet, the greatest transformation was within their own home. The mother's health stabilized, and the family found moments of joy in the simplest things: a shared meal, a burst of laughter, the comfort of being together. One afternoon, the son received a call from a distant relative, a person he had barely known. The conversation was tentative at first, but it quickly became clear that old wounds could be mended. The family who had once turned their backs began to reach out, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. The son hesitated. Pride battled with the longing for peace, but in the end he chose love. He invited them to visit, to share stories, to build a new chapter together. The reunion was messy, imperfect, but real. Walls crumbled and bridges were built, not in a day, but over time. The son realized that the legacy of his mother's sacrifice was not just survival, it was the power to transform pain into love, rejection into belonging. And in that transformation, they found their true victory. The house, once a place of hardship and silence, became a home filled with warmth and hope. The son and his mother stood side by side, no longer as victim and survivor, but as architects of a future born from struggle and grace. Their story echoed through the community, a reminder that dignity is earned not by the absence of hardship, but by the courage to rise above it. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed heavy, they would look at each other and know this simple truth: love and sacrifice are the roots from which all healing grows. There were no longer loud arguments in the house. The walls that once echoed with pain and resentment now held the kind of silence that comes only after a storm, a calm earned through fire and rain. The mother, now older and more fragile, spent her days in the small garden behind the house. She didn't speak much, but she didn't need to. The lines on her face, the curve of her smile, the way her hands gently touched the soil, all of it told a story deeper than words. The son, still juggling his growing responsibilities, often watched her from the window. Sometimes he wondered how she had endured it all, those years of humiliation, isolation, and quiet suffering. But more than that, he marveled at how she had turned that pain into a love so profound that it had shaped his very soul. He hadn't always been grateful. He had been angry once, angry at the world, at her, even at himself. But life had a way of teaching lessons, not through speeches or sermons, but through seasons. And now, standing on the other side of so much loss and healing, he saw her differently. She wasn't just a maid who had been treated like trash. She was a warrior in plain clothes, a saint without a pulpit, a woman who had carried generations forward with her bare hands. Her life had been lived in shadows, yet she had become the light for so many. That summer, a local university invited the son to speak at a public event. The theme was resilience. He hesitated at first. What could he possibly say that would be new? But something inside urged him to go, not for himself, but for her. He didn't speak about statistics. He didn't talk about politics or policy. He told a story about a woman who scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets while people looked through her like glass. A woman who endured slaps, not just physical but emotional, social, generational. A woman who raised a boy in a room with cracked ceilings and broken dreams, yet never let him forget who he was. And then he spoke about how that woman's quiet dignity changed his life. The auditorium was silent by the time he finished. Tears flowed. People stood and clapped, Not for him, but for the invisible women like her. When he returned home that night, the mother was already asleep. He sat beside her bed for a long time, holding her hand, thinking about how many people now knew her story, even if they didn't know her name. And it felt right, because she never wanted fame. She never asked for recognition. She just wanted her child to become more than what the world told them they could be. The following weeks were a blur. His speech went viral. Interviews followed. Journalists wanted to know more. People from across the country sent letters, some recounting their own stories of unseen parents and second chances. One letter stood out. It came from a woman in another state who had been estranged from her own son for over a decade. After watching the speech she had written to him, they had reconciled. The son read the letter aloud to his mother. She smiled, eyes twinkling, and simply said, "That's enough for me." But fate wasn't finished. A few months later, the mother fell ill. At first it was subtle, fatigue, breathlessness. Then came the hospital visits, the tests, the sterile rooms filled with the scent of disinfectant and the hum of machines. The son stayed by her side, cancelling meetings, postponing interviews, putting the world on hold. Nothing mattered more than being there. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the hospital window, the mother looked at him and said, "Promise me something." He leaned in. "When I go," she whispered, "don't build a statue. Don't make a fuss. Just help someone else's mother. That's enough." He nodded, tears falling freely. And a few days later she was gone. The funeral was small, just a few close friends, some neighbors, and the son. But in the weeks that followed, stories began to emerge. The woman who had once been dismissed as just the help had paid for another maid's son to finish school. She had comforted a single mother down the street during a divorce. She had left food quietly on the doorstep of a struggling family. She had taught a young girl how to read. So many little acts, so much silent strength. Her legacy wasn't just in what she endured. It was in how she gave, even when she had nothing. The weeks after the funeral passed in a strange haze, a mixture of deep sorrow and unexpected peace. The house felt emptier now, not because of the silence, but because her presence had always filled it in ways no noise could. The son returned to his routines, but nothing felt the same. Every morning, he paused at the small garden she once tended, where now wildflowers bloomed freely. It was as if the earth itself refused to let her be forgotten. One evening, he found himself sitting at her old sewing table, the one she rarely used in the last years, but never gave away. Tucked inside the drawer were folded notes, grocery lists, prayer cards, and one small faded envelope. Inside it was a letter, not addressed to anyone, not signed, just a quiet reflection written in her unmistakably careful handwriting. "If you ever read this, know I loved you even when you hated me. I prayed for your heart more than I prayed for my own health. I knew you were angry, and I forgave you before you even spoke the words. You don't have to make me proud. You already did. The day you stood up for yourself and chose to love again, you gave me everything I ever dreamed of. My life wasn't wasted because I had you." He held the paper to his chest and wept, loud, broken sobs that didn't ask for comfort. No one could hear them anyway, and that was okay. Some grief has to be faced alone. Later that night, he opened his laptop, heart still heavy, and began writing something he hadn't planned, a scholarship fund proposal for children of domestic workers. He called it the Silent Strength Fund. He didn't want to just speak in auditoriums.
He wanted to do something real, something that would echo the quiet sacrifices his mother had made. Not through headlines, but through changed lives. Within months, the project gained traction. Donations poured in, especially from people who had seen his earlier speech. Single mothers, retired workers, former housekeepers, they all gave what they could. But even in the success, there were moments of deep reflection. He remembered how, as a teenager, he used to lie about what his mother did. How he'd say she worked in hospitality, all with an agency, anything but the truth. How ashamed he had been, not of her, but of how the world looked at her. And now here he was, building an entire foundation in her name. He visited schools, sat with students, and told them his story, not as a hero, but as a son who once failed to see the crown his mother wore, hidden beneath a scarf and calloused hands. One girl reminded him of himself at that age, quiet, withdrawn, guarded. Her mother worked nights cleaning offices. When she received the scholarship, she burst into tears, not because of the money, but because someone had finally seen her. "I used to be embarrassed," the girl said, "but now I feel proud." That moment alone made every sleepless night, every hard memory, every ounce of grief worth it. But life doesn't move in straight lines. Healing comes in waves, and sometimes so does regret. One autumn morning, as the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, he drove back to the old house where his mother had worked for years. It had been sold, renovated. A different family lived there now, but the memories clung to the bricks like moss.
He didn't ask to go inside. He simply stood across the street, staring at the window she used to look out from during breaks. How many times had she cried in that house? How many times had she swallowed her pride for the sake of keeping her job? How many times had she been called less than human, only to come home and pour love into the very child who once rolled his eyes at her? He whispered an apology to the wind, not because he still carried guilt, but because some wounds deserved acknowledgement, even if the person who bore them had already healed. Back home, he lit a candle beside her photograph, not out of ritual, but remembrance. He still dreamed about her sometimes, not as the frail woman in her hospital bed, but as the young mother who used to hum softly while washing clothes by hand, who danced with him in the kitchen when no one was watching, who packed his school lunch even when she had no time for her own. She had been poor, but she had been rich in everything that truly mattered, and she had given it all to him. As the scholarship fund grew, more lives were touched, more stories were told, more children walked across stages wearing caps and gowns, their proud parents watching from the back row, often in silence, often unnoticed. Just like her, he made sure her story stayed alive, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph, not of riches or revenge, but of radical love. One day, a national news outlet invited him for an interview. The host, well-meaning but distant, asked, "What do you think your mother would say if she could see all of this now?" He smiled. "She'd probably say, 'Don't forget to eat.'" The studio laughed, but he meant it. Because even after all the speeches, all the headlines, all the honors, her love remained simple, honest, grounded. It wasn't about legacy, it was about family, forgiveness, sacrifice, gratitude, and above all, love. There were some things he still couldn't throw away. The apron, the old sandals with one worn-out strap, a wooden spoon with burn marks from years of constant use. They sat in a small box in the corner of his bedroom closet, untouched, but always remembered. Not because he needed physical reminders, but because those items carried the texture of her sacrifices. Every once in a while, he'd open the box and just stare at them. Not cry, not speak, just sit there quietly. The way she used to sit after long shifts, silent, still, collecting herself before giving more of herself. One cold evening, during a storm that rattled the windows, he sat with an old notebook she used to scribble in. Most of the pages had lists, ingredients, dates, chores, but tucked between 2 pages was a drawing, childlike, a house, a boy, a woman with an apron, and underneath it, in shaky handwriting, "My son will build a better home." He held the notebook to his chest and exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for years. She had always known, long before he did, long before he believed in himself. She had planted the vision like a seed in her spirit, quietly, patiently, and now he was living inside the garden she had imagined. But even gardens need tending, so he kept going, not to chase legacy, but to protect it. The Silent Strength Fund expanded to more cities. It funded tuition, food programs, therapy for children growing up in unstable homes. He partnered with local organizations, visited communities, sat with single parents, and listened, not as a savior, but as a son. The media tried to paint him as a self-made success story, but every time he was interviewed, he corrected them. "I wasn't self-made," he'd say. "I was mother-made." He turned down brand endorsements and big speaking gigs if they didn't align with the purpose. He didn't care about clout. He cared about impact. And still, he carried her in everything he did. He no longer felt shame about her work. Instead, he honored it. He spoke to crowds of privileged people and told them, "The person who cleaned your toilet, folded your shirts, served your food, might have a son who will change the world. Don't you dare look down on them." There were moments, though, when the weight of it all became too heavy. One evening, after a long day of meetings and travel, he returned home to the apartment he'd chosen, not for luxury, but simplicity. He collapsed on the couch, phone in hand, and scrolled through old photos he had never shared publicly. One was blurry, but perfect. She was laughing, head tilted back, hands covered in flour. It was a rare photo. She didn't like the camera, said she had nothing to show. But this photo, it showed everything. It showed joy, resilience, light. It showed who she was when no one was watching. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "I miss you." He didn't expect a reply, but sometimes silence is sacred. In that moment, it felt like she heard him anyway. The next morning, he got a letter in the mail. It was from a boy whose mother had received aid from the foundation. The letter was written in crayon. "Thank you for helping my mom. She is very tired, but now she smiles more. I want to be a good man like you. I clean my room now. Love, a future hero." He laughed through tears. That was her legacy. Not fame, not wealth, not a name engraved in marble, but kids believing in their mothers again. Kids learning what love looks like. Kids dreaming of being good men. One day he visited a school named after her. A teacher invited him to speak. The children sat cross-legged, wide-eyed, some fidgeting, some whispering. He didn't give them a speech. He told them a story about a woman who worked all day and still cooked at night, who was disrespected by strangers but never disrespected her own, who couldn't afford a birthday cake but gave her son the last piece of bread every time. They listened, and when he finished, a girl raised her hand. What happened to her? He paused, then smiled softly. She became a legend. The kids clapped. On his way out,
He stopped by a mural in the hallway. It had been painted by the students. It showed a woman holding a broom in one hand and lifting a child with the other. It was the most accurate depiction he'd ever seen. The caption read, "Strength comes in quiet forms." Years later, on the anniversary of her passing, he visited her grave. No cameras, no speeches, no press, just the sun and the soil. He knelt and placed a flower, one from her old garden, now carefully grown in pots on his balcony. "I did what you asked," he whispered. "I built a better home." And as the wind rustled the leaves, he smiled again, because she had always known.
The house was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he had just grown too big for its narrow corridors and peeling walls. Either way, as he stepped through the threshold, carrying nothing but a duffel bag in silence, he felt the weight of years settle on his shoulders, the same creaky floorboards, the same humming refrigerator, the scent of old wood and faint lavender. Her scent still clung to the corners like a ghost, refusing to leave. He walked slowly through the living room, touching the edges of worn furniture. There were still faded photographs on the wall. None of them were of him. She had taken them down long before her passing, not out of spite, but perhaps out of surrender. He had drifted so far away from her life that at some point, even the memories had started to hurt. But now he was back, not just in body, but in soul. The foundation was thriving. The programs she inspired had reached places she had never dreamed of visiting. Children from broken homes, raised by nannies, janitors, street sweepers, were now entering colleges on full scholarships, funded by the very housemaid, once treated like nothing. And yet, none of the public accolades had filled the quiet ache inside him. It was here, in this little house with its rusted sink and creased wallpaper, that he felt closest to her, to what she stood for. He sat in the corner where she used to sew clothes after midnight. She would sit there for hours fixing torn school uniforms and old curtains, just to make ends meet. Back then, he'd resent her for it. He wanted her to sleep like the other mothers. He wanted her to cook pancakes on weekends, not drag her aching body to her second job. But now he understood. She wasn't choosing work over him. She was choosing survival for both of them. The silence in the room was interrupted by the distant sound of children laughing outside. It brought a smile to his face, the kind of joy he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. He stood up and walked into the small kitchen. Everything was still where she left it. The chipped mug she used every morning, the dented teapot, the tiny magnet on the fridge that read, "Be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you can't see." He stared at that magnet for a long time. It had been just a cute saying when he was younger, but now, after everything, it felt like her final lesson. And that's when the idea hit him. Not like a flash, but like a slow, rising tide. What if her story didn't end here? What if her kindness, her sacrifice could be passed forward in ways she never imagined? Not just through speeches or scholarship awards, but through quiet acts in everyday places. He opened his laptop and started typing. The next morning, an email went out. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream for donations or shout statistics. It simply said, "She cleaned floors so I could walk through doors. She was mocked so I could be respected. She was invisible so I could be seen. I want to honor her, not with noise but with kindness." So starting today, if you've ever been helped by someone others ignored, tip extra, look them in the eye, say thank you, share their story, and if you can, pay a bill they can't. Let's make dignity louder than shame. He didn't expect it to spread, but it did. The next week, a waitress in Minnesota opened her envelope and found $1,000 tip with just 2 words written on a napkin for her. A janitor in London was given a promotion by a CEO who had read the story and remembered how his own mother once scrubbed hospital floors. A school principal in Canada began a Quiet Hero Day once a month, where cafeteria workers, bus drivers and cleaning staff were honored like royalty. The ripple had begun, and it wasn't about him. It was never about him. Weeks later, while attending a small town hall event, he was approached by a teenage girl. She looked nervous, clutching a crumpled paper in her hand. She asked if she could read something. The room grew quiet. She stepped up to the mic. "My mother works as a cleaner in a hotel. People leave trash on the floor like it's nothing. They never say thank you. They call her by the wrong name, but she comes home tired and still makes me dinner. I used to be embarrassed of her, but then I saw the video of the housemaid's son, and now I'm proud. Because my mom isn't just a cleaner, she's my hero." Tears fell freely in the room. Even he, who thought his heart had cried all it could, felt something break open again. Afterward, the girl walked up to him and gave him the paper she had read from. He folded it gently, slipped it into his jacket, and hugged her tight. Her mother watched from a distance, wiping her hands on her apron. They exchanged a glance. No words were needed. Dignity had spoken. The wind was colder than expected as he stepped out of the event hall that evening, but something about it felt cleansing, like a reset button on the soul. He had made speeches before, accepted awards, sat across tables from billionaires, but none of it felt like tonight. None of it had felt as real as that young girl's trembling voice reading from a sheet of notebook paper. It was never about being impressive. It was about being true. And somehow, somewhere along the way, he realized he had forgiven himself. The guilt that had quietly followed him like a shadow, for not appreciating her when she was alive, for turning his back during those years of rebellion, for seeing her through the eyes of the world instead of the eyes of love. It had loosened its grip. Not disappeared completely, but softened. It was her dream, not just for him to succeed, but to understand. And now, finally, he did. That night, he returned to his hotel and sat by the window overlooking the city. It was a small town, the kind she would have loved. Simple, humble, honest. He pulled out the crumpled note the girl had read and placed it on the bedside table like a sacred relic. Then he reached for his phone and opened the Foundation's platform. For weeks now, stories had been pouring in from across the globe. A woman in New York who had been a housemaid for 20 years wrote, "For the first time, someone asked me my name and said it like it mattered." A young man from Australia shared, "My mum was a nanny for a wealthy family. I used to feel ashamed, but now I wear her old uniform shirt under my jacket when I go to college. She gave up her life so I could build mine." Another came from a truck stop in Oregon. "I was a dishwasher at a local diner. One night, a man came in, ordered coffee, and tipped me $500. Said it was for his mother. I cried in the kitchen." Each story lit something inside him. He wasn't the only one who had missed the sacrifices. He wasn't the only one who had been blind. But now the blindfolds were falling off. All across the world, people were beginning to see again. 2 weeks later, he visited a school in rural Ohio. They had written to the Foundation, asking if they could name their new library after the woman who was never named. a tribute to every invisible worker who made education possible. He walked through the building in silence, admiring the murals painted by students. One caught his attention, a drawing of a woman in cleaning gloves, holding a book in one hand and a child in the other. The child was drawn with angel wings. The caption read, "She cleaned the world so I could dream in it." The principal approached him quietly and said, "We used to teach history through wars and kings. Now we teach it through love." It was enough to make his voice fail, but not his purpose. He stayed back after the event, helping serve food to the children. He made sure to shake hands with every custodian and kitchen staff member. They were stunned, not by his fame, but by his attention. It reminded him of his mother's eyes after long shifts, how they would light up just from a simple act of being noticed. That night, he received an email. It was from a man who once lived in the same apartment block they had struggled in years ago. The message was simple. "I used to laugh at your mum, called her a glorified cleaner, said she smelled like soap and poverty. Years later, I lost everything. I ended up working in a laundromat. The day I finally understood her, I cried in the back room for an hour. Your story gave me peace. I'm sorry." He stared at the screen for a long time. Then, without hesitation, he replied, "You're forgiven." She would have forgiven you too, because this was her legacy. Not revenge, not proving people wrong, but opening the hearts that had once been closed. Months passed. The movement, once a whisper, had grown into a quiet thunder. In neighborhoods where maids were once ignored, neighbors now left handwritten cards at their doors. In hotels, guests tipped housekeepers with folded notes that said, "For the strength behind the smile." In schools, children now stood to applaud the janitors during morning assemblies. But most beautifully of all, young people who were once ashamed of their parents' work were now creating videos, sharing stories, starting pages with titles like "My Mum is My Queen" and "The Hands That Built Me." He watched it all unfold with humility. He didn't claim credit. He didn't appear in interviews anymore. He simply watched and remembered every mop bucket, every aching back, every tear she wiped before putting on her smile. She had not lived in vain. She had lived loudly, through him, through every child now proud of their parents, through every adult who finally said thank you, through every small act of gratitude that echoed louder than any speech. On the one-year anniversary of her passing, he returned to the old house. He lit a candle on the porch. Then, as the wind blew softly, he whispered into the night, "I see you now." The candle on the porch flickered against the chill of the evening wind. He stayed there for a while, just watching the flame dance in the dark, as if she was saying something he could only feel. A soft knock echoed from the gate. It was the neighbor, an old woman who had lived next door for decades. She held a tray of baked goods, her hands trembling slightly with age. Without speaking, she sat beside him on the porch steps and placed the tray between them. "I never told her thank you," she said softly. "She helped me once, when my husband had a stroke. She never asked for anything back." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them was not heavy, but full, like two souls finally breathing the same memory. "I think about her every time I sweep my floor," the old woman added, almost to herself. "Because she never swept just dust. She swept shame, hardship, pain, all into corners where we couldn't see it." The candle flickered again. This time he nodded, because that was the truth of her life. She cleaned more than just houses. She cleaned pain from the lives of others. In the weeks that followed, a new initiative was launched, the Invisible Hands Project. It wasn't his idea, but it was born from his story. People from all walks of life, began submitting short tributes to the invisible hands that shaped them. Housemaids, janitors, laundry workers, gardeners, caretakers. The project printed these tributes on large banners and displayed them in public places, train stations, schools, libraries, airports. Each banner had no photos, just text, just truth. One read, "She never went to college, but she paid for mine." Another, "He woke up at 4 a.m. so I could sleep through mine. I called him just a driver. He called me his purpose." And another, "She was told she was replaceable. She raised a child who became irreplaceable." People stopped to read. Some cried. Some smiled with a look of realization, as if remembering something buried. He visited one of the exhibits in person, standing among strangers who didn't recognize him. A young man nearby was wiping his eyes. He turned to the older man beside him and said, "I'm going to call my mum." And just like that, another thread had been woven into the legacy. Back in the city, the Foundation's work began expanding. Not just storytelling, action. They partnered with companies to improve pay and working conditions for domestic staff. They launched mental health programs for caregivers. They provided scholarships for children of housemaids. And in one powerful move, they hosted a global summit titled "The Strength Behind the Silence." He was invited to give the keynote speech, but declined. Instead, he sat in the front row and listened to a woman from Brazil speak about raising 5 children while cleaning homes 6 days a week. He listened to a man from Kenya describe pushing a mop through hotel corridors while writing poems in his head, some of which were now published. He listened to a teenager from Georgia talk about how his grandmother raised him on minimum wage and infinite love. None of them were famous. But that was the point. Because the world had too long reserved its praise for those in suits and titles, it was time to celebrate those who wore aprons and name tags. Later that evening, he sat by himself at a cafe near the summit venue. A server approached shyly and placed a note on the table. It read, "I watched your video years ago. It made me quit my job at a company that disrespected cleaners. I now manage a wellness center for working moms. Thank you for reminding us who the real heroes are." He folded the note carefully and put it in his wallet, next to the only photo he had of her, sweeping the porch, smiling at something off camera, probably him. One day, he returned to the town where it had all started. The house was still there, smaller now, though nothing had changed physically, just his perspective. He knocked on the door, not to enter, but to pay his respects. The new tenant, a single mother with 2 kids, welcomed him with a warm smile. She didn't know who he was. She just offered him tea. As they sat on the familiar porch, he asked if the floor still creaked near the kitchen. She laughed and said yes. He smiled. Some things never change. Before leaving, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a full scholarship for both her children, courtesy of the Foundation. She stared at the paper for a long moment before bursting into tears. She didn't say thank you. She simply hugged him, the kind of hug that holds generations of silent battles. He held her just as tightly, because that porch, once a symbol of struggle, had now become a sacred altar of redemption. That evening, he walked to the edge of the old park. The swing set she used to sit on while watching him play was still there, rusted but sturdy. He sat, not to mourn, but to speak. "I wish I had seen you clearly," he whispered. "But now the world does." A soft breeze passed by. He closed his eyes. Somewhere between pain and peace, he felt her smile. And that is just one ripple in the ocean of untold stories. If this moved you, even a little, Imagine what's still hidden beneath the silence. I create powerful, emotional stories like this, told under the calming sound of rain, because sometimes the deepest truths are best heard in the quiet. So if you love storytelling that stirs your soul and lingers in your heart, hit that subscribe button. Don't just watch, be part of this journey. More stories are coming, raw, real, unforgettable. See you in the next rain-soaked chapter.